The startups are mostly based in Ho Chi Minh City, but they have some operation in Hanoi. It's not largest market for them. Ho Chi Minh City is the biggest business and economy for Vietnam. So people in Ho Chi Minh City have very different spending power and habits comparing to people who live in Hanoi. So Hanoians are more conservative. They are less likely to spend money in the new company. But once they trust somebody, they will spend a lot. So very high lifetime value customer, but harder to acquire. So when you have a stronger base in Ho Chi Minh first, then use power and force to go up north. It's a bit harder for new players to enter Hanoi first.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 20,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Did you know that over 70% of B2B trade are conducted on credit terms? However, many suppliers struggle to support this, leading to lost business opportunities. Fluid offers instant B2B financing with one tap, seamlessly integrating with marketplaces and supplier platforms. This payment flexibility empowers buyers to secure their purchases on credit terms or installments. This results in increased basket sizes and an influx of new buyers for suppliers. Fluid provides a great user experience and the ability to facilitate high-velocity trade. This differentiates Fluid from traditional digital lenders and invoice financing companies. Want to learn more? Get in touch with Tracy, Fluid's co-founder, at trasy@gofluid.io to learn more. Hey Valerie, welcome to my humble studio.
Hi, Jeremy, and I'm so honored to be the first guest in your studio. And to be honest, this is not humble. I have a podcast and I don't have a studio set up this neat. So yeah, it's not humble at all.
Well, thank you very much for some of the technical dry run that we did just now. But excited to have you in person with 100% fast internet effectively between both of us this time around.
Yeah.
So I think what we wanted to talk about was follow up on our last conversation. A month ago, we were very excited about a lot of the semiconductor investments that were happening from the US to Vietnam. I think you want to share an update on that.
So I sent you an article about how Intel is withdrawing the further investment in Vietnam due to the unstable power supply chain and bureaucracy in terms of like permissions and licensings and construction permit in Vietnam. So I think the plan is they are using that investment to maybe shifting to other country in the region, such as Malaysia, which already have a fab in Penang, I believe.
Yeah.
So it's a bit heartening.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've always had plants and actually quite a good engineer base in Malaysia, because Malaysia also actually has had that institutional memory and educational chain of engineering for semiconductors, because they've been around for decades now in that Penang. So, but I think it's interesting because obviously it's a good fraction of that investment we talked about, but I guess it's still a net inflow of capital anyway. It's just a fraction of it.
Yeah, it's still a net inflow, but I think we gotta step up in terms of policy support and make the ease of doing business in Vietnam much more fluid. Recently, if you know of the Danish jewelry maker Pandora Group, they committed to build a new factory in Bình Dương province, and the project would be 136 million.
Yeah.
And the factory will bring like between 7,000 to 9,000 new jobs. And this is what I've been mentioning with you about, like new middle class, emerging middle class. A lot of people's life will be improved. But the Danish group Pandora also recently announced that the plan might be delayed. And initially they plan to officially run the factory in 2025, but now it might be delayed to like late 2026. And the biggest reason is also the delay in getting construction permission from the government.
So what's up with the delays in some of this permitting or process from your perspective?
I think this is still the consequence of the real estate crackdown in Vietnam and the anti-corruption campaign last year. Even though it's getting out of the way, a lot of people in government are still being very conservative right now and granting new license or new permission, especially in the Ministry of Construction license, because they're still waiting for things to stabilize. And I think that's why this year we have seen so many policy challenge from the construction side and real estate side of business.
How else has the real estate kind of like pop? How has that changed, I think, a lot of the aspects of life in Vietnam?
I think it's definitely poised to recover and to even prosper in the future, especially industrial real estate, because you have like many FDI projects coming from Singapore, Hong Kong, Denmark, even Germany, US, getting in line to invest in Vietnam. Even Korean like Samsung, LG, they want to build more factories and invest further in Vietnam. So the moment for all of the real estate recovery is coming soon. But right now, the market is still recovering from the crisis last year.
Now, I think what I was also surprised by the announcement about why they're withdrawing the investment was that they mentioned the power supply being a problem. Could you share more about that?
Yeah, so the power supply it's a issue for the past few years because Vietnam power supply is owned by only one company, which is EVN. It's a state-owned company that control the majority of like power supply in Vietnam. The company is not profitable, even though they have like pretty much 100% market share for Vietnam's electric power supply. So I think because they have too big of a monopoly power, they did not manage resources well. And especially in the north, the northern region suffer more of a inconsistent power supply.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that because I think a lot of people think of Vietnam as being very good at infrastructure building, so roads and so forth. And then what's also interesting is that Indonesia on the other side of the ASEAN, they're doing well in terms of providing more than sufficient power, especially in the Jakarta and Bali kind of like dynamics there. So I was just kind of curious about what you think about that.
I think we still need a lot of infrastructure investment. Still need to be a lot of like highway, road and bridges, especially in the southern region. Right now, most of the infrastructure investment are focusing in the northern region because actually that's where the FDI is flowing into. So the southern region is being kind of the less favored region in terms of infrastructure development. So you went to airport. It's for biggest city in Vietnam. The airport is not up to its standard.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Any other kind of like interesting dynamics about how infrastructure is being spent or managed across Vietnam?
I can only share that the northern region, especially like Hanoi and the surrounding provinces, are being more favored in terms of asset and investment allocation. So when you live in Vietnam, if you are in Hanoi airport, like Nội Bài airport, the road is entirely different comparing when you land in Tân Sơn Nhất airport going to Ho Chi Minh City Center. Yeah.
I think that's interesting because you said FDI, a lot of those investments are flowing to the north. Could you share a little bit more about what provinces they are and why they are flowing to those areas?
So the top 10 city and provinces that are attracting FDI this year, Quang Ninh, which is a northern province, very famous for mine and resources. One of the wealthiest province in Vietnam as well. Hải Phòng, which is another northern province. It's the largest port province in Vietnam. So a lot of trading happening here for like generation. Hanoi, which is the capital, also in the north. That's where I'm from. I was born and raised in Hanoi. And Ho Chi Minh City, that's in the south. Followed by Bắc Giang, which is also another northern city, 2 hours away from Hanoi. So Bắc Giang has been really open with opening new industrial zone. So Singapore has a project in Bắc Giang, and the next one is Bình Dương. So Bình Dương is a southern province that Pandora committed to build a new factory. So in the previous provinces that I just mentioned, only 2 cities or province from the south.
Right. I think what's interesting is that, like you mentioned, is that, Singapore has done these economic zones, right?
Yeah.
Industrial parks with Vietnam. So when you think about these provinces, do they favor specific FDI types or specific clusters?
I think Singapore is one of the largest industrial investor in Bình Dương province. And now they are also one of the earliest investor in the Bắc Giang, the northern area as well. So I think they have already a strong base in the southern region of Bình Dương, and now they are moving up north.
Gotcha. Yeah. So if someone wanted to do a large FDI investment, how should they think about it? Should they invest in the north, in the south, specific province? How should they think about where to invest?
I think have to look at the openness of the government or policy makers in that province. Secondly, looking at the demographic, right? I think the northern region have more human resources for now. You don't have to struggle as hard to recruit laborers into your company. So that's why there are more projects being done in the north. So I think two biggest factor, government policy and human resources.
So I think what's been interesting is you mentioned human capital availability, right? So I think this is an interesting dynamic where unemployment is not high, it's low in Vietnam, but also there's so many jobs that seem to be created. We talk about upskilling and changing job types in the future as well. There was an article by SCMP, the newspaper based out of Hong Kong, saying that there's the trend in China called tan ping, which is kind of like lying flat, which is the Chinese version of slacking or coasting. So there's this trend of supposedly youth kind of like taking a step back from being productive citizens and choosing to kind of like really focus on themselves, and kind of like the story of 1960s in America, like tune in and drop out dynamic. So they're saying that Vietnam now has this phenomenon, and I'm not sure how valid you think that is.
I strongly disagree with the article. If you look at PISA score, which is the test that measure like math and English score of students, actually in ASEAN, Vietnam is the second highest PISA score, just after Singapore. In all the country, if you look at the PISA score of the entire world, we are in the bubble of a high PISA score, but we have like lower GDP per capita comparing to Singapore or like South Korea, China, Japan. They also have high PISA score, but also high GDP per capita. So we are the only exception here. And actually Vietnamese human resources, Vietnamese youth is very competitive, very aggressive. I'm struggling to retain and hire talents here in Vietnam because they always going after the next and better opportunity. So there's no guarantee like I can hire a really good talent right now, but the next day they might have very attractive offer from MBB or another large like IB investment banking firm because they are so like hungry and so ambitious. They're always looking out for the next like better opportunity.
Yeah.
And actually a lot of Gen Z, like younger Vietnamese, they are not happy with just one job. Like they have this day job working in corporate, but at night they are doing like 2-3 more side hustles. Like this shirt, for example, is made by a young lady. She's only 23 years old. In her day job is working for a corporate, Vietnamese corporate. Her night job, she's working on 2 fashion brands. Like one fashion brand is this kind of office look.
Yeah.
And the second fashion brand is athleisure, more mass market look.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's 23 years old.
Wow.
So I disagree that we have that phenomenon.
Yeah.
I don't know where the writer is coming from.
I think maybe what the writer was, I mean, because they're also writing from China, right, in Hong Kong, was that I think they were implying that Vietnam and China has a very strong cultural linkage in terms of internet memes or stuff like that. So I think they're just saying that there's a trend is moving. But like you, I kind of feel like it's not just about Vietnam, right? But I think in China, youth unemployment is almost effectively 50% based on the last set of statistics. So obviously, if you're unemployed and there's not enough good jobs, then yeah, I think it's quite easy to have a fad that's called supposedly like you're lying flat, you're not working. But you're not working because there's no jobs anyway. So it's a bit of a circular loop, right? Where it's like there are no good jobs, so you don't want to work, and you don't want to work in this. I mean, to me, it almost feels like a way to, if I take a giant step back, it's like blaming you for wanting to lie down and tune out and drop out. Doesn't feel like a very solvable issue. I think having good jobs is the way to solve it, because I think everybody wants to work, everybody wants to make money, everybody wants to build a family, everybody wants to buy a home, right? So I just feel like it's a little bit like, I don't know what's the word. We're looking at the second or third order effect of a youth unemployment crisis. And then we're saying like, oh, these people are lazy. But you're like, yeah.
Yeah, you only look at, a small fraction.
Yeah, exactly. A small fraction of all the people, and this fraction of people are like justifiable in the sense that self-justifying why they're tuning out because the job availability is not great. But I think what's interesting is that I think Vietnam obviously is taking a lot from the Chinese model, right, historically, in terms of the education focus, but also some of the industrial value chain build out as well, right? And of course, we see a lot of the Chinese manufacturers also setting up shop in Vietnam as well as part of the global China's plus one, so on and so forth. So what do you think, are there any specific, I think, differences that you think Vietnam is doing that's different from the way China is approaching development?
In terms of talents and...
Yeah, in terms of talent or in terms of industrial choice.
Yeah, I think in terms of talents, we are not as aggressive like for China right now, right? They shut down the whole edtech industry.
Yeah.
They don't even, I feel like they don't even encourage students to kind of learn foreign language or exploring international culture or study abroad. But Vietnam is pretty much encouraging younger students to exchange with other universities, learning different like languages. I mean, my major back in high school was French. So we still really promote learning about all the culture or all the languages. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a big shame, right? Because education tech is also, it's not just about tech, right? It's also a way for parents who want the best for their children. They're kind of like voting with their dollars, but also voting with the child's time and their own time. But what they think the future is going to be, right? So in terms of like learning languages, learning computer coding. So I think it's kind of weird to us. I mean, state education is at minimum designed to be lowest common denominator because you want everybody to be educated. But it's not designed to be personalized for every child, right? Because that's bonkers and crazy expensive if you want to do it. So I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing China did, honestly. Yeah. So talk about the Vietnam education tech market. I mean, obviously it's quite hot. A lot of people focus on building. I recently had a presentation from Marathon Education. They're looking to build a university, right? As well in Vietnam, and even regionally, they announced that at the Bali Education Tech Conference. So love to hear your point of view.
Yeah, so actually I helped Marathon Education recruit for their first university hire.
Right.
Spencer. Did you meet with Spencer?
I haven't met Spencer.
Yeah, maybe get him on the pod at some point.
Yeah.
But I met Spencer when he was in Fulbright University.
Yeah.
He left and then I connected the dot and I told Duke, the founder of Marathon Education, to convince Spencer to join force.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about what Duke is building, the university vision, because again, I shared last time, I think the K-12 is getting enough investment and traction. What's beyond K-12, university, post-grad, upskilling and enrichment learning after graduation is missing. So I'm excited about that gap. I think this year, a lot of deals activity this year in Vietnam are in edtech. Not so much of new company, pre-seed seed. You probably know of those companies before, but this year, I'm sure edtech is the industry that received largest amount of funding in Vietnam. Yeah.
I think a lot of folks are interested in the space because it feels good, does a good social purpose, it helps society go along, it builds the economy over time. So yeah, I think a lot of interesting in education tech. Any specific trends or companies you're excited about in education tech? I know last time around that you were very bullish about adult learning and you promised to announce it eventually. I don't know if you can announce it yet.
I can't announce yet. Yeah. I'm still working on it, but yeah, it's an adult learning space.
Okay, all right. What else is there? Yeah. Any other trends that you like or in education tech?
I think just startup that improve productivity, the Vietnamese human workforce.
Yeah.
So like HR tech.
Yeah. So I think one interesting part is that we were talking about is we were looking at an article recently about the rise of pre-seed and seed funds, kind of like a landscape view across globally, but also regionally as well. So do you have any thoughts about that?
I think globally pre-seed and seed fund are rising.
Yeah.
Because it's getting harder and harder to raise a huge growth in late stage fund because the returns are not being shown there. If you look at recent Instacart IPO, for example, the only investor that made money from the Instacart IPO is the seed and Series A investor.
Yeah.
So it's not about like, it's a trend, but I think mainly because the late stage fund right now are getting harder to raise. And if you read recently, Coatue just raised a new fund and they have to cut management fee, or the existing LPs don't have to pay management fee for this new fund.
Yeah.
And that's why we see more pre-seed and seed, because that's where the opportunity is. That's where you can show the return, and it's less challenging to raise a pre-seed fund comparing to a growth and late stage fund.
Yeah. I think about the Instacart, I think Sequoia invested 3 times in Instacart, and the first check made a lot of money. Second check was like, And the third one, they lost money versus especially that of the S&P 500, right? If it was an index fund as well. So I think it was an interesting set of numbers to look at. What do you think about the context of seed and pre-seed in the context of Southeast Asia and maybe Vietnam?
Yeah, so pre-seed in Vietnam in particular being much needed, because the past 1 year and a half, most investment activity in Vietnam, I think, are VC funds investing in their existing portfolio companies. So they are helping their portfolio companies first before investing in newer companies. So there's very little of you pre-seed seed fund who are willing to invest in very young, like less than 1 year old company, which is why I enjoy quite a good quality of deal flows and also very attractive valuation, being one of the few pre-seed fund in Vietnam right now.
How do you cover both Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City?
Actually, the startups are mostly based in Ho Chi Minh City, but they have some operation in Hanoi. It's not largest market for them.
What's the difference? Why is there a difference?
So Ho Chi Minh City is always the biggest business and economy hub for Vietnam. So people in Ho Chi Chi Minh City have very different spending power and habits comparing to people who live in Hanoi. So Hanoians are more conservative, and they are less likely to spend money in the new company. But once they trust somebody, they will spend a lot. So very high lifetime value customer, but harder to acquire. So when you have a stronger base in Ho Chi Minh first, then use that power and force to go up north. But yeah, it's a bit harder for new players to enter Hanoi first.
Yeah. I think in terms of market expansion, how do Vietnamese companies think about expansion? I know I was at a Cambodia conference recently in technology, and they said that there's a lot of Vietnamese companies who move from Vietnam and expand to Cambodia, for example. Is there a common corridor, or what? How would you see Vietnamese companies? So you said one is from Ho Chi Minh City from the south to north. How else do they expand?
Yeah, if you look at traditional company,
Yeah.
like much larger established company,
Yeah.
Cambodia and Laos are the first market, and it's usually not that challenging for them to enter because there are already a lot of Vietnamese business owners in Cambodia and Laos.
Yeah, already, yeah.
And for example, like rubber industry, I'm pretty sure, and even agriculture, I'm pretty sure a lot of rubber plantation owners in Cambodia are actually Vietnamese.
Yeah, I heard also the recycling industry in Cambodia also is very Vietnamese.
Yeah, very Vietnamese. I can go to Cambodia and Laos and find me and pho and speak Vietnamese. Yeah.
That's the test to find out. Yeah. I think what's interesting is that I think there's a question which is like, how culturally fluent are the Vietnamese in expanding to the rest of Southeast Asia, right? So how comfortable are the Vietnamese expanding to Indonesia, to the Philippines, to Singapore, to Malaysia, to Thailand? How do you think about that?
Yeah, this is another kind of, I guess, like challenge because we only starting to expand regionally recently. Right. And for example, the corporate like Mobile World, they actually shut down the Cambodian expansion. They shut down the Cambodia store, and now they're pivoting to Indonesia. So they're partnering with an Indonesian local partner to open a new like Mobile World store in Jakarta. Will they succeed? I'm not sure. They just partner like late last year, late 2022, and I think opening like this year. Yeah. So too early to tell. Yeah. But this is gonna be the first generation of entrepreneurs who are expanding globally. Yeah. And if you look at VinFast, the chairman mindset is pretty much like we will go hard or go home. So he committed to invest in Indonesia. So he wanna sell it to I think he already have a country manager in Indonesia, India, Europe and US, of course.
Wrapping things up here, any other differences that you see between the North and the South or within provinces that you think are important for people to think about?
I think most importantly is the behavior of the two. If you want to expand to Vietnam, then you should observe those differences. Yeah.
Test it out on both sides. Yeah. But I think what I find most interesting is that the way you said is like the South is more entrepreneurial, more startups, but the FDI is moving to the North where there's better infrastructure, more human capital. So it's quite interesting.
So long-term goal is the economic development will be even out between the two. Right. I mean, the whole across region of Vietnam. So if you look at the Bain report recently, the e-economy in Southeast Asia. So right now, digital economy of Vietnam is 30 billion, which is less than 10% of Vietnam GDP. But actually, our government goal is to get it to 20% of our GDP by 2025 and even 30% in the next 10 years. Yeah. So there's huge opportunity for tech startups to tackle on, but we need the government to be more open-minded and have a friendlier policy as well.
Yeah. On that note, thank you so much. I'd love to summarize the 3 big takeaways. First of all, thank you so much for sharing about the recent update by Intel to withdraw its investment plan in Vietnam. But I thought it was interesting to dissect a little bit about the reasons why. So we talk about policy differences that's there in terms of the slowdown due to real estate bust, but also due to the power and infrastructure availability that's available. So I thought it was a very interesting case study about something that happened, but actually providing a lot more color from an insider's perspective and locals' perspective about why it actually happened. Secondly, thank you so much for sharing about human capability, availability across different regions at a provincial level, but also talking about why FDI is flowing, where it's flowing more to the north, but also we talked about some of the regional differences, which I think even for myself is new. And lastly, thanks so much for sharing about what you're seeing in the education space about the next generation of youth. We both don't believe in tanping that's happening by SCMP. So I guess we're on a record for disagreeing with them, but we believe that I think there's a lot of hunger by the youth to learn and study. I think that also shows up in the education tech sector as well. Yeah. On that note, thank you so much, Valerie.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.